Get on top of it before they do. Every 24 minutes, tipped furniture or a falling TV sends an injured child to the emergency room. Preventing tip-over incidents is easy, inexpensive, and only takes 5 minutes. Learn how to secure your furniture and TVs to protect children at anchorit.gov.
Hi, I'm Mary Rose.
And I'm Ryan, and you're watching Catholic TV,
America's Catholic Television Network.
We talked about giving God our guilts. Today we have a new challenge, giving God our fears. Some years ago, some friends of mine who've been to Medjugorje, in Yugoslavia, they've been there quite a few times, and they called me and said, I want you to come over and see the latest edition of the newspaper they got from there. And so I went over there, and I got there, and they showed me the headlines of the newspaper. It said, Mary says, love the love within. I said, wow, that's living in the love of God. Love the love in your marriage. That's loving God. My parents had a tough struggle. My dad, an alcoholic, my mom, an angry spouse. They were married for 54 years, but they didn't become soulmates to the last 17 years of their marriage. It was God's love that held them together. St. Paul and Jesus both used the example of the relationship between Jesus and his church, the relationship between husband and wife. I don't think there's a greater sign of God's love in the world than a couple that's growing in unconditional love for each other. There's no greater gift than to be married to a soulmate. Love the love in your marriage. That's loving God. Love the love in your family. I come from San Francisco, and there are a lot of Italians in San Francisco. And I've had funerals for Italian men. And I've discovered oftentimes they don't go to church all that much. But I've discovered their experience of God is the love in the family. And they're not far from the truth. Love the love in your family. Love the love in your friendships. I don't know if God has blessed you as I've been blessed, but it always seems that when I'm in difficult moments, that God sends an angel into my life, someone to lift me up, someone to be an example of love and faith. It seems always when I've been down, there's been some special person in my life. I call them my angels. They're my soulmates. Maybe I don't see them for 10 years and we talk like we talked yesterday. When I'm talking about my soulmates, I'm talking about an experience of God. Every time I use the word God, I can use the word love. And you know why this faith has been so important in my life? Because I've learned life's hardest lesson. And I think life's hardest lesson is life is what happens while you're making other plans. There's the old saying, if you want God to laugh, just tell him your plans. In fact, I think the greatest illusion in the world is that we're in control. In fact, I think the whole core of fear is this desire that we have from within. We want so much to be in control. We want to control reality. But we know down deep that we're not in control. So my faith is so very simple. I live in the love of God no matter what happens to me. I know that God's love is always with me. I love the thing. There's a lot of scripture scholars tell us that Jesus is surprised by how little faith there is in the Gospels 365 times. So he's always given teachings about fear and faith. Remember when he tells us even the birds of the air and lilies of the field are taken care of. How much more are each one of us? So look at nature. But the one I like the most is when Jesus says even the hair in your head is numbered. Now, I've loved a lot of people in my life, but I never knew how much hair was on their head except that they happened to be bald. You know, just think of that image, that God loves us so much that God even knows how much hair is on our head. And I live in the love of God, so I know that whatever happens to me, that God's love has always been with me. And I can go back into my past, as I mentioned earlier, and see God's love in my darkest moments. And if God has been there to take care of me throughout my journey, that God's going to be there with me forever. Now that's my faith. You know, long journey of faith. Taken me a while to get here, but it's been my journey of faith. I ask each one of you what kind of faith you have. Let me ask you a question. How much of a controller are you? How much do you have to be in control? How much do you try to control your spouse? How much do you try to control your children? How much do you try to control the world around you? You know what makes a person control? Fear. And the more that fear runs their life, the more they're going to control. Now let me share with you what control isn't. Control isn't giving information. It's not even giving suggestions. It's not even giving a lecture. That's not control. Control is when we make a person pay a price if they don't do what we want. That's control. You know, I love it when somebody asks me to do something and I can say no and there's no price to pay. But there are some people that if I say no, I know there's a price to pay. That's control. In fact, oftentimes parents have asked me, they say, well then, Father, how can we raise our children and not control them? I tell parents, the most important thing you do is prepare your children for life. And life is filled with consequences. I think one of the most important things in the world for a parent to teach a child is when you make a decision, there are always consequences. So you're deciding to do something, but you're accepting the consequences. If you make a good decision, expect good consequences. If you make a bad decision, expect bad consequences. I think it's a terrible job of parenting when they absorb the consequences. Sometimes life gives the consequences, sometimes the parents give the consequences. In fact, that's how I believe that children develop a conscience, by learning consequences. So follow me. Now, but the last thing you want to ever do is when your children let you down is to take it personally. They're not doing it to you, they do it to any parent they have. But when you take it personally, when you give them the silent treatment or the icy silence or the strained voice, that's control, that's conditional love. And they'll react to that and they'll never learn the consequences. So now to get back to my point now. You can tell how much fear runs your life by how much you control. But that isn't all of it. You know what happens? I get angry at you when you don't appreciate how much I'm controlling you for your own good. Don't you know the only reason why I'm controlling you is because I love you? Now, how many of you recognize that cycle of fear, control, anger? I think all of you, if you're honest with yourself, should recognize it. All of us are controllers to some degree. None of us are perfect. But the issue is whether it's a 10 or a 3. Now, that's why I say, you know, it's so important because of our denial system. And usually we have a denial system built around what we most need to hear. That's why all of us need someone in our life that we've given them permission to tell us the things we don't want to hear. You see, whenever you attack my behavior, I will always be defensive. That's true for all of us. Whenever we're attacked, we become defensive. I can be 100% wrong, and I still will become defensive. I may listen to you if I've given you permission to tell me the things I don't want to hear. All of us have denial systems. I remember recently I was given a retreat up in Connecticut to high school students. And some of them had serious drug problems. And some of the parents came to me before the retreat and said, Father, we're praying you get through to these kids. They really need to hear what you have to say. Well, when I started talking about drugs and alcohol, those were the kids that fooled around. They were the ones that didn't listen to what I had to say, the kids that most needed to hear it. I run into that all the time. I was given a mission up in Oregon, the rural part of Oregon. In fact, I think the militia were out practicing in the hills. But after one of my conferences, one of the ladies came up to me and said, "Father, why aren't you preaching about hellfire and damnation?" I said, "Ma'am, I preach about God's love, and if you don't believe it, you're going to create your own hellfire and damnation. I don't need to preach about it." But every once in a while, I run into these rigid, angry Catholics that every time they hear a priest preach about God's love, they want to report him to the bishop. They're so angry and rigid. They're the ones that most need to hear about God's love. In fact, people have given me quite a few articles about how dangerous it is to preach that God is love. In fact, you know what I keep in my briefcase? Pope Benedict's first encyclical. You know what it's called? God is love. In fact, I was up in Washington a couple of years ago giving a retreat. I gave my sermon on Sunday inviting people to come to the mission, the retreat, and one of the ladies on the way out, she asked me if I believed in hell, which I thought was a rather strange response to my homily. But I prayed over and thought about it for a few days. You know what I came to realize? Once you know God's love, hell is not an option because you know you're loved. It's like in your marriages. If you love your spouse and your spouse loves you, you know divorce is not an option because you love each other. See, once you know God's love in your life, hell is not an option because you know you're loved. And all the people who are worried about hellfire and damnation, know why they're so worried? Because they don't know God's love. Wherever you have one, you don't have the other. But back to my main point. Recently, a lady told me she came with her daughter on the talk on fear and control, and she asked her daughter on the way home, she said, "Honey, do you think I'm a controller?" And her daughter said, "Mom, you're one of the biggest." She told me she didn't talk to her daughter for a week. So why is it so important to know whether you're a controller or not? Because fear is the most dangerous of all emotions. The more you feed fear, the bigger the fear gets. The longer you keep the fear inside of you, the harder it is to get rid of. You try not to think about fear, you're just feeding it. Fear of death, fear of illness, fears of failure, fears of being alone, economic insecurities, fears of abandonment, fears about our children or our grandchildren. There are all kinds of fears. All of us know where we need faith. It's wherever we're afraid. Now, this is a key point in this talk that I need you to pay special attention to. I want to show you precisely how dangerous fear is. When you try to control somebody you love, they want to do the opposite. I just ask you, when your spouse or your children or your parents or your friends try to control you, don't you want to do the opposite? All of us hate to be controlled. All of us hate to be controlled. I watched my parents for years. Every time they went on a trip, my dad was very impatient and my mom was very slow. And every time my dad had this brilliant insight. If he got out in the car and he honked the horn a few times, he'd get my mom to hurry. You know what my mom was doing while he was honking the horn? Washing the dishes for the 5th time. Checking on the bathroom for the 6th time. The more my dad wanted her to hurry, the slower she went. That's why they always started their trips angry at each other. I'm just as impatient as my father, but I'm a lot smarter. A few years ago, we were going up to Sacramento. I live in San Francisco. The day before Thanksgiving. And we have the Bay Bridge there, and if you leave before noon on a day before a holiday, it's usually a 2-hour trip to get to Sacramento. But if you leave after noon, it'll be 3, 4, 5-hour trip. So I wanted my mom to hurry. I slowly sat there and read the newspaper like I didn't have a care in the world. The next thing I knew, my mom was telling me to hurry, so we beat the traffic. If my mom had the slightest inkling that I was trying to hurry her, we would have left about an hour later. That's the truth. Remember when I was in Phoenix, I was in this big parish, and they used to have a 6 a.m. Sunday morning mass right in the middle of the night. And they'd want a quickie, no music, short homily. They'd say, Father, give us a quickie. And I'd start to preach. About 5 minutes into my homily, they'd look at their watch. About 5 minutes later, they'd start shaking their watch. You know what I did? I just went longer. I preached my longest sermons at the 6 a.m. Mass. I didn't get mad, I just got even. That's how dangerous fear is. In fact, if your children are not going to church and you're upset about it, every time you make them feel more guilty, they want to go to church less. That's the truth. Or if one of your children is dating somebody or married to somebody you don't approve of, every time you express your disapproval, they like the person more. That's the truth. That's what the danger of fear is. Usually when fear makes us control, we push the person into what we fear the most. Now I have a very simple prayer. You know, we've heard often, let go and let God. I have a very simple way of giving God my fears. In fact, I discovered a long time ago how powerful prayer is when I pray from my heart. I was one of those people, I couldn't quit smoking. You know, I tried for years to quit smoking. My parents wanted me to quit smoking. My family wanted me to quit smoking. My friends wanted me to quit smoking. And being a people pleaser, I tried to quit smoking. But I didn't want to quit smoking, so I fought myself. And whenever I fight myself, I'm not doing what I want to do. So I eventually give in. So I started praying to God to give me the willingness for the willingness to want to quit smoking. I didn't have the willingness. And I'll never forget, it was 1990. It was the first Tuesday in February in 1990. I was given a mission at Mother Seton in Canton, Ohio, the same place where they have the Hall of Fame. And I woke up that Tuesday morning at 6:30 and I wanted to quit smoking. And it wasn't a struggle because I was doing what I wanted to do. And ever since that day, I've hated the smell of smoke. I've never had the slightest desire to ever smoke again. But you know what's interesting? I have not been able to pray to God, as you can obviously see, to give me the willingness for the willingness to give him sweets. I don't even want to pray it. I enjoy him too much. I'm not there yet. So there's a tremendous power in prayer when we pray from our hearts. Now, my prayer with fear is I face fear down with faith. Remember I said wherever we're afraid is the absence of faith. I think we come down to the two realities of life, fear and love. Is where I have fear is I need to have the love of God. And I pray that what I fear the most will happen. I name what I'm afraid of. See, I face the fear with faith, fear down with faith. I pray to God that what I fear the most will happen if it's meant to be. Now, I'm not praying for it to happen, but I'm praying surrender is acceptance. Why can I accept it happening? Because I have faith that I live in the love of God. It's God's love within that gives me the freedom to take life on life's terms. Otherwise, I'd find my life filled with stress. You know, they say that the expression that Jesus uses, take up your cross and follow me, is to take life on life's terms. Let me give you an example. This happened a few years ago. I was going up to Calgary, Canada to give 3 retreats, and the week before I went up, I went to my urologist. And my urologist, my PSA was quite high. He wanted to take some biopsies. He said, it's probably just an infection, but I want to be sure. Well, halfway through the first week, my primary doctor called and told me that I had prostate cancer, and the doctor wanted me to come home as soon as possible to make sure it's been contained. Now, I grew up in an Irish family, and in the Irish family, you never talk about the laundry, you don't talk about anything. And I grew up in an alcoholic family. So we were taught very early that the more things are in turmoil, the more you say everything's fine. I could be in a hospital bed with 6 hours to live. The nurse could come in, how are you doing? Oh, I'm doing just fine. So I was telling everybody, I'm doing fine. And they were all telling me that nobody dies from prostate cancer, although I've known people that have died from prostate cancer. So there was this kind of dance, this denial dance. Well, eventually, this was my prayer. I prayed to God that it was meant to be that I die from prostate cancer. I'm not afraid to die because of God's judgment. I just don't know how the world's going to make it without me. 49ers will never win another game, or the Giants, if I'm not there to root them on. My family won't know what to do if they don't have my directions. In fact, you know what? It's very consoling. When Jesus is in the agony in the garden, Jesus doesn't want to die. Twice he says, Father, take this cup from me. Jesus didn't want to die. Now, we've given a lot of reasons, like he took on everybody's sins, like he could do that. I think the reason is very simple. Jesus would never have the same relationship with his mother again. Never have two people loved each other so much. It's the greatest love story in the history of mankind, the love between Jesus and Mary. He loved his apostles. He never have quite the same relationship with them. He wouldn't walk with them. He wouldn't teach with them. Wouldn't laugh with them. His friends, the people he broke bread with, and had meals with. He'd never be the same way. It's hard to let go. Have you ever known a winning army to surrender? I've had people come to me, they get to hear the word from the doctor that they have terminal cancer. They'll be dead in a year. And they'll say initially, I'm so happy, I'm going home to God. Well, I tell them, baloney. I say, you may get there eventually, but you got to do some letting go. You got to let go. So I prayed to God that it was meant to be that I die from prostate cancer. I wasn't praying to die from prostate cancer, but I was praying if it did happen, surrender is acceptance. Why could I accept it happening? Because I have faith that God's love is with me. I gave it to God. It's let go and let God. And when I pray that prayer from my heart, God takes the fear from me. Well, afterwards I ran into a cancer specialist, doctor. And he told me our bodies constantly create cancer cells. And it's our immune system that fights off the cancer cells. Well, the worst thing in the world for the immune system is a lot of stress. That's why I truly believe the greatest medicine in the world is a deep faith, living in the love of God. Just think how much inner peace that brings us, to live in the love of God. Now, I gave it to God. In fact, I got the thought, look at how many heart specialists are writing spiritual books for their heart patients. That the best medicine in the world for a bad heart is learning how to let go, to go with the flow, to take life on life's terms. Now, I'd like to take this prayer of letting go through 3 of our big fears. Now, today, I'll probably get into just one of them. But I want to be able, and we'll continue our next session, but I want to take the 3 fears. Economic fears because of the times that we're living in today, the fear of abandonment, and the fears about our children and our grandchildren. I'd like to take each one of them individually. Now, I don't think there's anything in this world that can make a man more fearful than the worry about finances. I had the experience, that this downturn in our economy has affected me just as it has affected many of you. People are coming out to the mission, but they're not getting the materials, the CDs and the books that we have. Maybe before, when they get 2 or 3, now they're getting 1. The collections are half of what they used to be. So everything is going up, all the expenses, but the income is going down. I'm sure many of you know what I'm talking about. Well, a couple of years ago, we were going in the Sierras. For the last 30 years, every summer I spend a week in the Sierras. I call it my vacation with God. I have some wonderful friends. We've been doing it. We go out there, we take packed trains, and we go to the back country. And we just kind of relax and hike and just spend time with the inner self and just with each other. And I didn't have enough money to do it. And besides, when I came back, there was only going to be, wasn't going to go to work for 4 weeks, and the bills don't stop coming. Even though you don't work, the bills keep coming. And I was really worried. And I knew that if I went on the backpacking trip or the hiking trip and I was worried about money, that preoccupation would have ruined the trip. So I prayed to God. This was my prayer. I prayed to God that if it was meant to be, that I'm unable to continue the ministry because of finances, to let it be. I was willing to let go of the ministry if it was meant to be. And when I gave God, when I had the freedom to pray that to God, God took the fears from me. And you know what? I think during the week we were out there, I don't think I thought about money once. Because you know what? No matter how much you worry about money, it doesn't put another dollar in the wallet, you know? Well, when I came back, the first envelope I opened was a lady who sent me a $2,000 donation. She sold her house and she wanted to give me a donation. Never has that ever happened to me before. One of those things that honors at God. And what happened was I was able to enjoy the trip, and because I had given God my fears. Now, I also want to talk about the fear of abandonment and the fear about our children and our grandchildren. But we don't have enough time in our talk today to begin, so I just want to be able to say a few things to introduce the topic. And I think, you know, if between now and our next session, if you can spend some time just reflecting on your journey and paying attention to where you're afraid. You know, be honest with yourself and kind of look at your life. You know, if you're older, like myself, you know, are you afraid of death? If you're a husband and wife, are you afraid if your spouse dies and you're going to be alone? Or maybe that your kids aren't going to be there to take care of you, that you're going to be a burden to them. If you're afraid about abandonment, you know, the amazing thing, all of us have the fear of abandonment within us. You know, we usually in the beginning, a wife will be afraid her man will abandon her. Her husband will abandon her in the beginning of the marriage. Then when she gets in her 40s, she realizes her husband is busy about his career and about what he's doing, and he's not going to be there for her. So she develops her own personal life, her own friends, her own hobbies. And then her husband retires when he's 65, and he expects his wife to be there to take care of him. What happens is she's out there living her own life, and he feels abandoned. Sometimes we can be abandoned. Our children are going to abandon us. You know, but the problem is, if we give in to the fear of abandonment, we're going to smother the other person. And you know what the person is going to want to do when they feel smothered? They're going to want to run away as fast as they can. That's why the fear of abandonment is a very important issue that all of us have within us. All of us have some degree of the fear of abandonment. Now, we can look at our children and our grandchildren. You know, there's a lot of reasons to be afraid. I mentioned that in the previous talk. You know, you couldn't pay me to be 15 again. I think the children today are living a much more fearful life than when I was their age. I think there's so much pressure on the kids today. And I have a lot of fear, and parents are afraid for their children, afraid that all the trouble they can get into. So there's a lot of fear that we can have in these areas. And when we get together our next time, I want to talk about how do we give these fears to God.
On this Holy Thursday, we recall these words from the Gospel of John spoken by Jesus from the cross. It is finished. And at every Eucharist, we experience again, Lord, your life-giving sacrifice.
Vision loss is not something that you feel until it happens.
Most people lose their vision from diseases like macular degeneration and glaucoma, not at birth.
3 million Americans have glaucoma, and half don't even know it.
11 million people in the United States have macular degeneration.
So many eye disorders can be treated if caught early.
Make a plan today to get your eyes checked.
Visit brightfocus.org to learn more.
You're watching Catholic TV, America's Catholic Television Network.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the April edition of Encounter. I'm Kevin Nelson. This month, we feature an interview with John Smith, a young man who died after falling through the ice, but was miraculously brought back to life. His story is the basis of a new movie, Breakthrough, which is in theaters this month. We also have a two-part interview with artist, teacher, and author David Clayton. The first will be about Pontifex University. The second part will be about his book, The Vision for You, How to Discover the Life You Were Made For. And we'll have a new Reformer saint to tell you about in our question of the month. But first up is the incredible story which the new movie Breakthrough is based on. John Smith fell through an icy Missouri lake and was underwater for about 15 minutes. Against all odds, he miraculously made a full recovery. I had a chance to speak with John about his experience and what life is like for him now.
Well, with me now is John Smith, whose story the movie Breakthrough is based on. And thanks so much for being with us, John.
Thank you for having me.
What's it like to have a movie based on your story?
It's crazy. It's just unbelievable. You know, I'm from St. Charles, Missouri, really. And, you know, even though it's not a small town, it's still kind of small. And, you know, just a kid from St. Charles, you know, having his own film, it's really, really weird. But, you know, I'm super honored. I'm super blessed. To know these amazing people and have, you know, such an amazing film, amazing story turned into a film.
Talk about, if you could, in the movie, there is some tension at the beginning between you and your mom, too. Talk about your relationship with your mom and how that sort of has progressed and what it's like now.
Well, in real life, me and my mom never really had those issues, ever.
Okay.
You know, my mom and my aunt were my only two women in my life that I actually trusted, because I grew up having this idea that my birth mom abandoned me. My birth mom didn't want me. So in the film, that is portrayed, and that's the truth. That is the absolute truth. But I never really had my issues with my mom. My mom.
Yeah.
She has always loved me, always supported me, and has always been there. She used to sing to me, "You Are My Sunshine." She still to this day, when I'm going through hard times. When I was having nightmares after the accident, I had a recliner in my room, and she'd sit in there and, you know, just sing to me, and it put me at ease, and she'd always just pray over me. So we've always been close.
That's great. And maybe if you could take us to that day, what do you remember about that day, or do you remember that day at all?
I remember, you know, having fun on the ice and then it breaking and me fighting, you know. It's like getting in a fight with a tiger, though. You know, the ice was cutting all of us. I still have scars to this day.
Wow.
I remember the water line, me going under and above. You know, I remember, you know, yelling, "I don't want to die." I remember pushing my best friend up, just to stay afloat just a little while longer. But after this was all said and done, he came back and he told me he spent the night at my house, and he said, "I was expecting you to come back up, but you didn't." And that just really hit hard. I do remember that, but shortly after that, it was a blackout, and then, you know, it was me waking up in the hospital.
And talk about you now. There was no residual, or was there any residual effects to it?
No, I'm 100%. I can walk, run. I don't like to run. It's too much exercise for me, but, you know, I'm completely healed and normal. Just normal.
Yeah. And of course, the movie talks about and shows the community behind you. What was it like to see that? Yeah, I know you couldn't see it when you were in the coma as well. But you know, just to feel that presence and then continue after when you were healing.
Family in my life is everything. You know, other than God, family